fool is one of the most relatable, intriguing, and recurring figures in the world. There have been fools who have caused surprise and laughter since time immemorial. We worship folly by seeing it in people and in the world, and by willingly displaying it in ourselves. It is one of the timeless archetypes which we all inherit at birth. Many of us suffer from the absence of the fool in our lives. Frenetic and upright, we take ourselves too seriously, trying so hard to conform to a world which promotes workaholism, efficiency, and productivity that we might as well be cogs in a machine. As William Shakespeare said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Forgetting that playfulness is a basic human need, we wonder why we so easily become bored and exhausted, losing all capacity for spontaneity, authenticity, and passion. The antidote to this would be to give the fool archetype some space in our lives. To be in balance and not become excessively foolish and irresponsible, we need to develop the archetype of the sage who, despite being wise, recognizes the limits of his knowledge and can laugh at himself every now and then. Archetypes are not part of a mechanical system, but pieces of life itself, images that are integrally connected to the living individual by the bridge of the emotions. The character of the fool is complex, and various characteristics have been attributed to the fool: that he is dull-witted, inarticulate, unable to conform to the conventional standards of behavior, and that he has a natural simplicity and innocence of heart. The derivation of the word fool is the Latin follis, meaning a pair of bellows expelling empty air. Extended to people, it implies an empty-headed person with insubstantial thoughts. At the same time, bellows furnish the oxygen needed for combustion in much the same way that the fool fires us up. In 1511, the Dutch scholar Erasmus published In Praise of Folly, which became hugely popular in Praise of Folly, and is a profoundly penetrating examination of the fool in Western literature. Folly introduces herself, and since nobody ever praises Folly, she begins by praising herself, arguing that life would be dull without her. Folly criticizes everyone, and Erasmus's close friends warned him of the possible dangers of attacking the church. However, even religious figures found the work amusing. Friendship and marriage contain a certain amount of folly, because we tend to overlook the defects of our friends and loved ones, and consider them small vices in comparison to other people. Intellectuals are foolish in their pursuit of knowledge, spending years going to the library doing research, thinking that what they are doing is tremendously important, so that a few other intellectuals over of a century will read their book and think very highly of it. Folly compares philosophers to theater critics who unmask the characters on stage and ruin the actor's performance. They are boring and annoying. Philosophers don't seem to understand how the illusions that help make life bearable are useful, even if they distort reality. The fool seems to be infinitely freer and happier than those who are burdened by wisdom. They are the life of the party. Fools always speak the truth because they lack the wisdom to craft lies and seek to manipulate others. In essence, there is nothing that can make life happier than the joy that accompanies laughter and play. Folly is not merely universal, but necessary and even desirable to humanity. To be a person is nothing other than to play the fool, and to acknowledge this very fact is the highest form of wisdom. The wise fool. The fool represents a nostalgic return to a simpler way of life, a wisdom that comes not from the mind but from the heart. Sometimes the down-to-earth and simple-minded in their purity of heart can penetrate to profounder truths than those encumbered with learning and convention. In the same way, we sometimes sense a more resonant truth in popular proverbs than in rational exposition. Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky writes, "The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, if only once a month, call himself a fool, a faculty unheard of nowadays." In literature, wise characters sometimes depict insanity and madmen express wisdom. The oxymoron, wise fool, is a literal paradox where the character who is identified as a fool comes to be regarded as the beholder of wisdom. People sometimes accuse wise people of insanity in order to conceal their unwanted wisdom, either fearing the harsh words on many controversial topics or simply to punish them for speaking boldly. The archetypal wise fool is Socrates. Not only was his educational method based on exposing the folly of the supposedly wise, but he himself claimed that his own wisdom was derived from an awareness of his ignorance. Knowledge of ignorance is itself a kind of knowledge. As Shakespeare writes, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." There are two ways to be fooled. There are two kinds of mistakes: believing what isn't true and refusing to believe what is. When a difficult truth needs to be said, and everyone is too afraid to speak it, it's often the fool who steps up. There's something brave and pure about that. The fool says what others won't, and when he does, people feel a strange relief because deep down they know it needed to be said. There are two main kinds of fools: the natural fool, who blurts out truths without caring for social rules, and the professional fool, who uses humor and wit to express hard truths in a lighter way. One follows his heart, the other his mind. Often the greatest fools are smarter than those who laugh at them. They are fearless truth-tellers. As William Blake said, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. The fool, clown, and trickster share a similar role. They make people laugh, yet also reveal uncomfortable truths. Behind their jokes lies both order and chaos, wisdom and madness. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard told a story. A fire broke out backstage and the clown ran out to warn the audience. But people thought it was part of the act and applauded, even as the theater burned. That's how he said the world might end, with people laughing at the truth. Professional fools awaken people to reality, but many of them come from pain. This is known as the Musad clown paradox, the idea that comedy can hide deep sadness, anger, or anxiety. People laugh at the clown but often feel pity or unease too. Some even fear clowns, a phobia called coulrophobia, perhaps because the modern clown wears a fixed smile while hiding his true self. This split personality, and between the funny mask and the suffering inside, creates the dark side of the clown, seen in figures like the Joker. In medieval plays, clowns balanced laughter and fear. They made people laugh, but could also drag them symbolically into hell, showing both the light and dark of human nature. The fool is usually innocent, laughing with people or at himself, while the trickster enjoys laughing at others. The trickster feels secret pleasure in others' failures, what the Germans call Schadenfreude. The fool uses humor to heal. The trickster uses it to deceive. Laughing at oneself breaks down walls. It makes both the speaker and the audience more real, more open. The fool's humor often brings comfort and hope, even in hard times. The trickster's humor, however, hides a selfish game. In medieval times, jesters entertained kings with jokes, music, and tricks. But they also played a deeper role. They were allowed to speak the truth without punishment. They were both insiders and outsiders, mocking power while serving it. Jesters often wore funny hats with bells and carried a stick called a bauble, which symbolized the king's scepter, a small reminder that truth can wear a fool mask. Some jesters went too far and paid with their lives, but most were protected because they made the powerful laugh at themselves. Societies need such fools. They challenge norms, break rules, and remind us not to take ourselves too seriously. Many jesters were poor or disabled, dwarfs, hunchbacks, or outcasts. Yet through suffering they gained wisdom and insight. In Shakespeare's King Lear, the fool is the king's only true friend, the one who can mock him while still offering love and truth. The legend of Parsifal, the young fool, tells the story of a boy growing into a man. After leaving his mother, he seeks to become a knight and ends up at the castle of the Fisher King, who is deeply wounded. His land is barren, a symbol of his inner suffering. Parsifal attends a sacred ceremony but fails to ask the healing question that could save the king. Because of this, the castle vanishes, and he spends 20 years wandering before finding it again. When he finally asks, "Whom does the Grail serve?" the king is healed and life returns to the land. The story teaches that wisdom comes through innocence and suffering. Only the fool within us, open, honest, and unafraid to ask, can heal our deepest wounds. In Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, an old man loses touch with reality after reading too many books about knights. He decides to become one himself, fighting imaginary giants, which are really windmills, and defending people who don't need saving. He's both ridiculous and noble, a fool chasing impossible dreams. The word quixotic comes from him, meaning someone who follows beautiful but unrealistic ideals. Yet through his madness, Don Quixote shows us the power of faith, imagination, and the courage to be foolish in a world that has forgotten how to dream. This is the origin of the idiom tilting at windmills, attacking imaginary enemies. Don Quixote recruits Sancho Panza as his sidekick and squire, a down-to-earth peasant who is puzzled by his master's grandiose fantasies, but being promised great wealth follows him riding a donkey. Sancho's realism contrasts to his master's idealism. Don Quixote's good intentions, however, end up doing harm to those he meets, since he is largely unable to see the world as it really is. He is not only seen as a fool, but a complete madman. Despite his insanity, he is witty, and at times seemingly sane, so long as he avoids the topic of chivalry. This may be a warning that even the most intelligent people can fall victim to their own foolishness. At the end, Don Quixote becomes sick and falls asleep, and later awakes from a dream, awakening from his madness too. He realizes that he has wasted his life and is just crazy. The atmosphere of the novel turns from comedy to tragedy, and the people who looked at him with scorn can't help but feel pity for him. They insist that he is wrong, and that he really is a knight. What was before viewed as insanity is now considered sanity. After his life-giving illusions are dissipated, he dies. He dies from an overdose of reality. This brings in the question, is it better to know the truth and be unhappy, or live in a fool's paradise? In his novel, The Idiot, Dostoevsky explores this question to some extent. Dostoevsky's The Idiot. He portrays the ideal man, a positively beautiful individual, in a morally corrupted and decayed world. The protagonist, Prince Mishkin, returns to Russia after spending time in a Swiss sanatorium receiving treatment for epilepsy and idiocy. Until the 20th century, an actual medical term for neurological disorders. Starting with the train ride to St. Petersburg, he is thrown headfirst into the corruptness of society. The character appears different from other virtuous fools in fiction by emphasizing innocence rather than comicality. Dostoevsky writes, "First of all, this prince is an idiot, And secondly, he is a fool, knows nothing of the world, and has no place in it. Mishkin's open-heartedness, innocence, and lack of social experience is an instrument of satire, standing in sharp contrast to the corrupted, cold, money-hungry, manipulative, and egocentric society he finds himself in. The prince is frank, open, and unable to hide his true feelings behind a persona in order to impress others. He says what is on his mind, regardless of the social setting. This leads people to call him an idiot, even though he has deep insights about human nature and what it means to be a true Christian. The antithesis of Mishkin is Ippolit, a young atheist and nihilist in the final stages of tuberculosis and near death. He loses his will to live and rebels against society, nature, and God, and famously states, "It is better to be unhappy and know the worst than to be happy in a fool's paradise." Prince Mishkin, on the other hand, does not understand why someone would choose to be unhappy. Instead of philosophizing, the prince spends a considerable time with sinners, serving as their moral and spiritual guide. It is the small acts of kindness that truly matter in the world. Redemption is a key theme in the novel, to save the soul from the state of sinfulness through humility and compassion. In the most popular line of the book, Dostoevsky writes, "The prince assures us that beauty will save the world." In many fairy tales we see three brothers, the youngest being a simpleton whom everybody the fool as hero laughs at. But it is always this fool who becomes the hero in the story. He is the foolhardy brother who rushes in where angels fear to tread, and by doing so wins the hand of the princess and her kingdom. The fool seems to possess magical powers, and has Lady Luck on his side. His spontaneous approach to life combines wisdom, madness, and folly. When he mixes these ingredients in the right proportions, the results are miraculous, but when there is one-sidedness, everything can end up in a sticky mess. One of the most beloved figures in Russian folklore is Ivan the Fool. The Russian writer Leo Tolstoy wrote a story titled Ivan the Fool, alluding to this figure. In the story, Ivan is the youngest and third son in a peasant family. He is taken advantage of because of his naivety, kindness, and capacity to easily forgive others even at his own expense. His brothers are tempted by money and military power. However, Ivan lives a simple way of life. He lives in a farm, taking care of his old father and mute sister, and works in the fields. When the two brothers run out of money, they insist on getting their share of their father's wealth. The father objects, because it is Ivan and his sister who have helped him. Ivan, however, agrees to his brother's demands. The old devil, seeing Ivan's generosity and lack of conflict between the brothers, sends a little devil to each brother to start a feud. The two devils succeed in tempting the two brothers with greed and power, and they get into trouble. Ivan, who is stricken with illness by the devil, only works harder and overcomes all obstacles. The three little devils get together in order to defeat Ivan, but they all fail. As Ivan finds each devil one by one, they beg for their life and tell him that they'll grant him any wish if he spares their life. And so, Ivan is granted a wish and innocently utters, "God bless you," which makes them vanish. He can make gold out of leaves and soldiers out of straw, and decides to give the gold coins to the village peasants and conjure up soldiers to sing and dance. Finally, the old devil loses his patience and goes to Ivan, but is also defeated. While Ivan relies on his heart and believes in legends and mythical beliefs, the brothers focus on their minds and practicality. Ivan ends up marrying the Tsar's daughter. The man who has nothing receives everything. The fool becomes the hero. In tarot, the fool is commonly depicted as a man holding a white rose symbolizing innocence. The fool's journey, tarot, and purity, and a small bundle of possessions in the other. He is willing to sacrifice everything for the trip. He walks merrily looking up at the sky, living in a fool's paradise, absorbed in all the great adventures that await him. At his heels, a dog tries to draw his attention, because he is about to fall off a cliff. Tarot derives from the 15th century Italian illustrated playing cards known as trionfi, inspired by theatrical festivals and used for entertainment. They were later called tarocchi, from which tarot is derived, and whose root, tarok, translates to foolishness. Therefore, tarot is also called the fool's journey. In the 18th century, the occult practice of cartomancy started to rise to prominence, and mystics referred to the 78 cards as arcana, the first 22 being the major arcana, and the remaining 56 the minor arcana. The Fool has the number 0, and in most decks is the first of the 22 major arcana cards, the last of which is the World. In the last card there is a large laurel wreath symbolizing wholeness, in which the Fool, who is androgynous, becomes the cosmic dancer and the anima mundi, world soul. However, just as the journey towards wholeness ends, it begins anew, for it is a lifelong process. The Fool is both the beginning and the end of the journey. He is heroic because he jumps off the place of comfort into the place of the unknown. Here's your text rewritten in a simpler modern English, with around 30% rephrasing and simplification, but keeping the same meaning, flow, and length. The tone remains reflective and philosophical, but with smoother readability and more natural phrasing for a wide audience. The Fool's journey is much like the hero's journey, a universal story pattern where the hero receives a call to adventure and must leave the comfort and safety of the ordinary world. He steps into the unknown, the special world, where he faces his greatest challenge or dragon, which can be a deep fear, painful memory, person, or event long avoided. Through this struggle, he earns his treasure, the hard-won wisdom or strength that can only come from transformation. The journey represents a kind of psychological and spiritual death and rebirth. An old part of the self dies so that a new, wiser, and more capable self can be born. Eventually, the hero must return home to share the gift he has gained. Whether it's love, knowledge, or simply the courage to survive the unknown, the Fool, like the hero, is a wanderer, full of energy, curiosity, and endless life. In the tarot, he is the most powerful card of all. The Fool is constantly becoming something new. His path is the beginning of life's great mystery. The major arcana of the tarot represents the timeless experiences that guide a person toward self-realization. What Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, called individuation. Tarot cards can be used as a mirror of the inner world. Jung described a method called amplification, which helps to uncover meaning in dreams, visions, and symbols by comparing them with myths, art, religion, and folklore. The Fool is numbered 0, a perfect symbol of infinite potential. The circle of 0 represents eternity, the never-ending cycle of life. In ancient Egypt, the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, symbolized eternal return and unity. One is all, and all is one. It represents the fullness of being, where past, present, and future coexist. As many mystics said, God is an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. The circle with a dot at its center, the symbol of the sun, stands for the source of light, warmth, and life itself. It also represents the world egg, the original womb from which all creation was born, the paradise we once knew before awakening to consciousness. This deep longing to return to innocence and the nostalgia for childhood is really a yearning to be whole again, to find unity where all opposites meet. In Jungian terms, the dot is the ego, the center of our awareness, while the circle is the self, the total psyche that contains both the conscious and unconscious. As Jung said, "It is not I who create myself, rather I happen to myself." The image of the fool, now seen as the joker in playing cards, has changed many times over history, shifting between beggar, madman, and wanderer. In the 15th century, Visconti Sforza Tarot, one of the oldest surviving decks, the fool appears as a barefoot beggar wearing torn clothes and feathers in his hair, a symbol of wildness. In the Sola Busca Tarot, he plays a bagpipe with a feathered headdress. Similarly, in the un-German Hofämterspiel, the fool, Narr, plays the bagpipe, barefoot and dressed in a robe with bells, like a medieval jester. In the Mantegna Tarocchi, the fool is shown as an old half-naked man leaning on a staff, labeled misero, beggar. A small animal tries to grab his attention, showing that his instincts guide him more than logic. In some old French cards, the fool is blindfolded, walking by inner sight rather than physical vision, guided by intuition, not reason. By the time of the Tarot of Marseille, 17th–18th century, the fool is shown wearing a jester's cap, carrying a bag on a stick, with an animal tugging at his pants or chasing a butterfly. Finally, in the famous Rider-Waite Tarot, 1909, illustrated by Pamela Colman Smith under the guidance of Arthur Edward Waite, the fool is depicted stepping off a cliff, joyful and unaware of danger. Both artists were part of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a group exploring mysticism and hidden knowledge. Psychologically, the fool represents new beginnings, the start of transformation. Nothing truly begins without a fool's daring step. As has often been said, many inventors and geniuses were first thought to be fools, and sometimes still are. In Zen Buddhism, there's the concept of Shoshin, or beginner's mind, a state of openness, curiosity, and humility. The beginner sees endless possibilities, while the expert sees few. This mindset creates space for silence and wonder, the conditions in which deep insight or the numinous can emerge. If we can't listen to others or the world around us, we can't hear the voice of silence within. Our senses have great potential, but they're dulled by our lack of attention. Jung wrote, "The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom." To seek self-discovery often looks foolish to society. We're taught to follow a straight path: school, work, marriage, and anyone who strays from it is seen as a dreamer destined for failure. Yet, as the Chinese proverb says, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The fool doesn't fear mistakes or judgment. He's full of energy, eager for adventure, and ready to live life fully. The cautious person lost in thought stays still, trapped by fear of the unknown. We fear uncertainty so much that we'd rather fail than risk the anxiety of possibility. But overthinking only deepens suffering. We hurt more in imagination than in reality. Failure, however, is not the end. It's often the doorway to unexpected success. The alchemist said, "In filth it will be found," meaning that what we most need lies where we least want to look. The fool begins his journey unaware of the trials ahead. He may fall many times, but he keeps going. He lives in the moment, embraces change, and explores the unknown with a fearless heart. Every great person at some point has been a fool. In the end, what matters is not reaching the goal but the journey itself. As T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Yet even the fool has a shadow. His excitement and stubbornness can blind him to danger. Without reflection, he may step too far and fall off the cliff. The fool always stands at the edge between wisdom and recklessness. Sometimes our inner voice, and meant to protect us, becomes our harshest critic. It says, "Don't do that. You'll embarrass yourself." Or, "That's a stupid question. Everyone will laugh." This fear of appearing foolish stops us from growing, creating, and exploring. But only when we dare to look foolish do we discover the truth. And only when we risk falling do we learn to fly. This is the voice of conformity, the darker half of the fool. It whispers for you to play small, to stay comfortable, to chase approval instead of meaning. It teaches you to settle for pleasure over purpose, to trade your true hunger for the illusion of belonging. When we lose touch with the fool inside us, we become prisoners of resentment, jealousy, and quiet despair. On the journey toward self-realization, the fool embodies both the impulse to explore and the resistance that holds us back. He represents the eternal youth within, that spark which either keeps our creativity alive or traps us in childish dreams. If ignored, this archetype can imprison us in fear and fantasy, but when embraced, it brings back the wild vitality of early innocence. The fool is deeply tied to the child archetype. A child is untouched by masks, guided by instinct rather than by the moral cages of society. The child half belongs to reason, while the madman half escapes it. Both stand partly outside the suffocating logic of the adult world. The fool's gift is lightness, a refusal to be crushed by life's heaviness. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "Maturity is to rediscover the seriousness one had as a child at play. To live wisely is to play freely again." Psychologist Marie-Louise von Franz saw the fool as the symbol of the psyche's weakest or most ignored part, what Jung called the clowned inferior function, the underdeveloped channel of the soul. For a thinker, it is feeling. For a feeler, it is thought. Yet the fool goes beyond psychology. He is an ancient symbol of the unfiltered human core, the raw, untamed part of being that civilization tries to bury. He embodies what society despises, the awkward, the unpolished, the nonconforming, but also the bridge to the unconscious, the realm of symbols, dreams, and renewal. Through this bridge, the fool connects the mundane and the mystical, the rational and the irrational. Within him hides the key to inner wholeness, to the lost unity of self. The holy fool is not a saint in the old religious sense, but a rebel of truth, one who dares to live without masks, to speak against systems that demand silence. He risks mockery and exile for the sake of authenticity. He refuses to measure his worth by the reactions of others, or to shape his soul around fear and conformity. This figure stands beyond moral hierarchies and social approval. His compassion doesn't come from obedience, but from seeing humanity as it is, fragile, imperfect, yet capable of transcendence. To the old powers, such a fool is dangerous, because he cannot be controlled. He follows no doctrine, no God, no collective voice louder than his own conscience. Where once people said, "Be a fool for God," the new fool says, "Be a fool for truth." The wisdom of this world is still foolish, but not because of divine judgment, rather because it trades freedom for safety, depth for distraction, and meaning for comfort. The fool, then, is not the servant of faith, but its replacement, a symbol of the liberated human spirit that dares to live and think without needing cosmic permission.